Hi, everybody. Here I am, apparently by myself. Oh, Layla's here. Very good. So we're going to go ahead and start. And I'm just going to warn you yet again, this is chapter 5. So we're switching gears now. And we're going to move to more economics and how we look at efficiency analysis. And we are also going to look at how you value things, because last time with chapter 4, we talked more about how accountants value things. And accountants, remember now, are valuing assets. Oh, yeah, it's okay if you leave, Layla, it's fine. So, because we're going to record this and put it up, so it doesn't matter. So anyway, we talked last time about how accountants value assets, and they call them assets, and they actually assume that we buy these assets so you can produce profits in the future. And we're always measuring with our CDAs how those benefits or those profits measure up to how much the cost of that asset was, or the group of assets that you have that you bought with your project. And again, I want to talk about this idea of we're looking forward to what is the value of that additional asset you buy with that project, rather than looking backwards and looking at an average, but really look at a marginal or an additional amount of benefits you get from that new investment. Now, economists do not use the word asset. They use the word resource. And they're pretty much the same thing, except from a resource, you're not necessarily focusing just on these net profits or market net benefits. You're really looking at other sorts of benefits which you may get. And so it's a little bit different, because economists are looking at always having these resources go to their highest and best use, whereas accountants or business people are really having these assets produce the most net profit as possible. So one is totally focused on that market maximization of profits, and the other one is kind of looking at a combo thing, but has to live in a world where you have private businesses trying to maximize profits, but also other things going on that we need to worry about. So this is why this is seeming so confusing, because we're now switching into a completely different discipline with a completely different set of labels. Instead of assets, they're now called resources. And instead of out-of-pocket costs, we're really looking at this wily beast called an opportunity cost. The problem with the opportunity cost, it's your next best alternative. And this stuff is always changing. So this is what makes this very challenging for us, because who knows what the heck opportunities do you have? That's a tough one. So bear with me. We'll probably have today and at least on Wednesday to talk about this, because it is very complex. And for the undergraduates, this is kind of like the last chapter they have to deal with. So we're going to share the screen. And I'm going to go to a PowerPoint that you kind of have in your box under the book chapters. And so this is really adapted from the actual lecture that your book provides. And the reason why we're using it is to get you kind of used to the book, because when you look at the book, it's just not quite the same as when I talk you through it. So I want, for the first round, I just want to start explaining what's going on in this book. So this is now something, you have it. I've altered it to give it here. I'm going to load it up in your webinar thing, slightly different than the one that's in your folder, because I'm trying to really concentrate on just a few points and not confuse you so much. So again, what's the purpose of this economic stuff? It's really to focus on this wily beast called efficiency. So overall, for economists, we want throughout the world for everything to go to its highest and best use. And that's really what we would love. We would love all resources to become mobilized and move to where we most want them. And if that happens, we're not so concerned with who gains and loses. And I think for sustainability, that's a big concern. All these social justice calls, and I'm noticing the newspapers are looking more and more gloomy about situations and people worrying about how much they're being paid and they deserve a living wage and all these sorts of things. And economists would be less likely to worry about that and more likely to want everyone to go to their highest and best use, because that we feel that that's the best thing. So we really are measuring this concept of economic efficiency, which is really meaning that you have a positive net benefit, and that the project is the highest positive net benefit you can get. So if we use that asset or that resource for that project, that's the best thing. And we've assured that's the case by investigating it and done all our little analysis that we've been talking about. So we're really saying if we use it for this, the world's a better place. And if we use it for that, it isn't quite as good. But we're not talking about, well, whose world is this? It's just an overall blanket statement. So sometimes this can be a little bit misunderstood. And I'm sure you probably wondered, what is she talking about with this efficiency benefit cost analysis, or this efficiency net benefit? So that's what we're talking about. Okay, so the distribution of the net benefits is not always relevant in efficiency benefit cost analysis, which is why for sustainability, we don't get too excited about it. However, let me just say this before we go too far. You may look at a particular subset of the economy, i.e. the community or the referent group, and we may decide that some groups matter more than others. And this may enter into efficiency after the fact once that decision is made. But the initial pass on efficiency benefit cost analysis is we don't care how it's distributed. We just care that the resource is allocated to its highest and best use. And we need to figure out what that is. And it may also be that if you do a situation that this doesn't make the referent group better off, we still may do it because we may want to benefit a certain group. So we're not going to talk about that here, but we do talk about it immediately after in chapter 6. Okay, so then we actually get down and talk about what's the changes in the community. Are we better off or are we worse off just within the community? But this is more of a global discussion. So I don't want you to think that we're ignoring sustainability. I'm just trying to explain this to you because it's very complex. And what's complex? How to value things. What is the value of things? So again, we have all these various groups, the private sector, the public sector, and the general public. So we're always worrying about how it does overall, and we're less worried about how it's distributed among those groups. So if you're feeling like this is neglected, undergraduate, it will be for you because will be covered in chapter 6, the actual distribution stuff. So again, we're looking at the with and without analysis, and I want you to point you to right here where it says scarce resources are allocated to the project. So you're saying, okay, I'm going to get resources allocated to my project, and then I have to value the output of the project. That can be very thorny. How do we do that? And if we do not undertake the project, which is really the other opportunity or the other alternative, then we have scarce resources allocated to other uses, and we have to value those. And how are we going to figure out which one? Well, we got to compare the value with the project to the value if the resources go somewhere else. So that's what we're trying to do. And you notice we have the project benefit X and the project opportunity cost Y that we've been just talking about until you're probably sick of it, but that's where we're at. So again, back to this little drawing, because we're the with and without, and so we need to value the output of the project. And we need to value the output that we would get if we would use those resources doing something else. And can you imagine how hard this is? This is why we're having this discussion. I have nothing but sympathy on this one. Okay, so in measuring the project benefits, which is X, and the project opportunity cost, right, which is the cost, all project outputs and inputs must be valued. The problem is to get accurate numbers. This is our big challenge, and this is what is going to drive you to distraction in this chapter. How do we actually value these? It gets very technical. And the reason why it does is if we had a competitive market, we would be so, so happy. Because if you're doing work in a competitive market, the value that we place on something, you will be at equilibrium, where the value we place on a good or service is just equal to the amount of resources that we used to produce the last one. But remember, we talked about in the economics review that we have a problem with this sometimes. Some project outputs or inputs may not be traded in markets, like you may have pollution. No one is charged, you don't pay, they don't come monitor the pollution you generate every day. We all generate pollution every day. Everybody does it. We all drive our cars. Do we have to pay for each mile we drive how much pollution we generated or how much outdoor recreation? Free hiking? Not really. So that becomes difficult for us to value because we don't have a market to put a price on that output or input. We get our prices from markets, market equilibrium. Or sometimes market price is just flat inaccurate for other reasons. It's just not exactly measuring an opportunity cost or the true value of an output. So what do? We got to do something. So we have kind of two problems that we're going to talk about, although we're not going to do much about them. We're just going to talk about what you do. So if we have missing markets, then we have no way to really know what the equilibrium price is. What is pollution? How do we figure out pollution cost? In this class, I gave you the number in the problem. It's just not how life goes. I would love that, but it's not how it goes. We don't know how much damage our cars are doing every minute we drive them, but they're clearly doing a lot of damage. And then we have markets that don't measure value correctly because they're non-competitive. And when you have non-competitive markets, you're not functioning at equilibrium. This is situations of monopoly and monopsony. Monopoly is one big seller where they can actually control things, or one big buyer. Monopsony can also control things. So we don't like situations where certain players have power because they can control prices through their actions. Competitive markets have a bunch of little buyers and a bunch of little sellers, and they come together and nobody has any more power than the other, and they just automatically come to Adam Smith invisible point of equilibrium, and everything is perfect. The other problem we have is that people that don't like the market price, because there's going to be some people that don't have the ability to pay. When you don't have the ability to pay, what are you going to say? But the price is too high, but I need it. So we convince lawmakers to distort the market by providing prices that are not accurate, or forcing prices that are not accurate. Or we tax, like imports. Why are we taxing imports? To protect our own markets. But that doesn't mean that we're doing efficient actions. We're basically protecting our own markets. That's not efficient. Resources should flow to their highest and best use throughout the world. That's what we think as economists. But we still protect our own markets by charging import tariffs. That is something that distorts a market. That's what it does. It distorts a market. If in fact we shouldn't be producing coal, then that should go out of business, and they will gradually find another place for themselves. Now, I don't want to sound as callous as Ivanka Trump when she says just find something new. But it is true that these adjustments, as these resources flow to their new use and people get bummed out from being unemployed, is a very real thing, and it's a social problem. But it's something that efficiency analysis tends to ignore. So that's what you have to understand. It sounds a little cold, and this is why people don't like economists, but it is how things work in the long run. So we cannot just not have knowledge that that's how it's going to be. So you'll hear about that in a minute. So how do we deal with these problems? One way is to do non-market valuation. How much is that pollution costing? How much is outdoor recreational opportunities benefiting us? All these sorts of things. In fact, I read something yesterday that our junk food habits are destroying us. So what are we going to do about that? Tax. My suggestion would be tax the heck out of junk food, but you know, I'm an economist. People are not going to be happy if their chips start costing double, but that's definitely a way to do it. And the other thing is shadow pricing techniques, where we're actually adjusting them to reflect marginal benefits or marginal costs to the economy, that they're inaccurate, so we're going to adjust them, which is possible, but is sometimes very painful, particularly for the non-economist, because it does require some sort of process that you can estimate this stuff. Hard. Just let me say, very hard. So what is shadow pricing? You're going to actually adjust to reflect the true benefits to society or the true marginal cost to society of this thing. So for example, if it was junk food, if junk food is really bad for us, we wouldn't want it to be cheap. We want it to reflect all those health expenses associated with eating it. All this sugar in the soda. So they're talking about a sugary tax on soda. This is definitely reflecting the true cost to society of us all consuming that stuff. So it's probably better than just outlawing. Remember in Prohibition, we decided alcohol had a marginal cost to society, so we outlawed it, and that kind of backfired. So my general approach is not to tell people what to do, but to encourage them to do the right thing by taxing the bad thing. Because if it's bad, there's some marginal cost associated with it that we're not accounting for in a supply and demand curve. We're not accounting for it. So we need to account for it. And that's really what we're doing when we're shadow pricing. We're trying to adjust for the true marginal cost. And often when markets are distorted by regulations or taxes, or are non-competitive because of monopoly or monopsony, then you have a situation where you don't know what price to use. Do you take the price from the demand curve, or you take the price from the supply curve? And that's really what the conundrum you're facing in chapter 5 is. How do you adjust? They'll give you curves and they'll ask you which one you use, and that's what you got to figure out. So that's what we're going to run through one example today, and I'm going to give you some homework help. And there's also an FAQ on this, chapter 5, so look at that too. So the pricing rule tells us what's the appropriate price to use in the benefit cost analysis. This is in fact the pricing rule. So if you're valuing output, like I'm going to produce new shirts, that's output. So how do you, if you think that there's a problem, then how do you actually do this? Well, if the output satisfies additional demand, there's some demand that's not being met, and you're going to now satisfy this demand. It's not getting the good or service, and you're going to satisfy it, then you satisfy it by what those buyers are willing to pay. That's how they value it. That's how they value using those resources like that. Right? But if it satisfies an existing demand, you're just saying, oh, I could buy this at my neighborhood store, or I could go 20 miles away and buy the same thing over there. So it's the same demand. I'm either going to buy it here or buy it there. And if what you're doing means I'm just going to change, instead of buying it here as a result of the project, I'm just going to buy it over here, because you're now going to get a project, be able to produce it in my local area, I'll just buy it there. Then you're actually satisfying an existing demand from another source. So you're going to value that good or service at the cost to supply it to that alternative location. So that's what it means when it says satisfy existing demand from an alternative source. The other thing you need to know is how to value inputs. Why why you ask me? Why do we need to know this? We need to know this because that's the cost side. What are inputs? Inputs are the resources that you use up in order to produce that output. And we've got to value them because they're going to their highest and best use. Should we produce shirts or should we produce pants? Well, if I'm producing shirts and I need some of the things that the pants are using, hey, pants inputs, come over here and make shirts. So if I'm attracting them from another use, don't make pants, make shirts. I'm going to have to pay them just about equal or just more than they're getting making pants to come make shirts. So I've got to attract them with my best wage offer. Come over here. And they will come when I pay more than they're making in the pants production to come make shirts. So that's what they're doing when they're talking about producing from an alternative market use. They're saying, okay, you want it over there in the pants group, and they're only going to pay you that much. That's what you're worth. And I'm going to pay you more because I value you more. So come over here. So they will, because they don't care. You're going to go to your highest and best use. Discrimination is not an issue here. You're just saying, come over here. We value you more than those guys over there. So they will. The next option is the input is coming from an additional supply. So we're going to start a project that produces more shirt making stuff. Just magically turn plastic into shirt making stuff. So we're sourcing it from an additional supply. How much does it cost us to get this plastic to be used in shirt making stuff? Well, from the supply curve, how much, remember, supply curve tells us how much it costs to produce each one. Demand tells us what we think it's worth. So again, this is why you're saying alternative source, it's already being demanded by someone else. And we're just saying, come on over here. Come have a time over here with us. Then you're really attracting from an alternative source and it's priced over there and you got to pay more to attract it over to you. So you just go to that alternative source, you get the price, that's a shadow price. But if you're sourcing it kind of internally from the additional supply, you're going up a supply curve or you're going up a demand curve, then you need to estimate that supply or demand curve to know what that price would be. So that's where it gets quite thorny because you know, I can't just get on the phone and say, oh, how much are you paying over there for this? And use that as a proxy for attracting it over to me. I've got to actually estimate that supply and demand curve. Fortunately for you, we don't ask a lot of tough questions on this homework or assignment. So this may confuse you, but I think if you think about it, using my little pants and shirt example, it's not that horrible. So anyway, this is kind of what we're saying here, is this is really a competitive equilibrium, right? So if you're here at E, what is this? Let's remind ourselves what this says. If in fact, this is the demand curve coming down, this person values this amount right here at this price. And as you go down, what happens? As you get more and more of this good or service, you value each additional one less and less. So this is what's really important when we think about efficiency. We don't want to produce stuff that we don't highly value. We want to produce stuff that is important to us and means something to us. So this is why we would stop right here, because this last one we value at this. This is how much we value this one right here. And this is how much it cost us on the supply curve to produce this one right here. And every one before that, you notice this is what it cost and this is what we value it. So for the community, we're really better off because this person doesn't care if it's cheaper. This person doesn't care if it's cheaper. This person doesn't care if it's cheaper. It's going to stop right here because if we end up here, then it costs us this much to produce and we only value it this much. So we'll back up. And then if we get an additional supply, you see, then we actually can go to here and look at its new value because we got an additional supply, like we talked about right here. And right here. So an additional supply, valuing the output, satisfies additional demand from an alternative source or satisfies additional demand. Here's what I'm thinking. We don't have additional demand. We just basically attract supply from somewhere else. We get a new supply curve and we end up here. So that's really what we're talking about with a competitive market. That's what it looks like. You get an additional supply, it comes in, and you get that new price. So let's go to the next one. Now, let's start with an example, which is probably the most thing that angers my students most of all, is when I talk about the effects of a minimum wage. Here's an example. So we have a minimum wage. And we have a situation where we set the minimum wage at WM. What is the effect of that? You would normally employ this many people at this wage, right here. But because you have a minimum wage, what you have, and why do you have a minimum wage? Because everybody in this end is unhappy about the wage. They want a higher wage. So we basically have to set a wage above equilibrium. What will happen is, instead of employing this many people, you will employ this many people. So you will employ fewer people, and each person will make more than they would have when we were at equilibrium. Why do we like this? Because people that don't feel that they're making enough, minimum wage people, want higher wages. It's called the livable wage. This is a very hot thing right now. And so what you have is a situation where you now have fewer jobs, and for those who are working, they're making more. And let me just say, we have a problem with our rationing device, because normally our rationing device is price. If you're willing to pay, you get it, and you go to equilibrium. But in this case, we have a wage rate up here, and we have this many people along this line that are willing and able to work at that wage rate, but we're only going to hire this many. Now, an economist would suggest to you that the most efficient thing to do is hire this group, because this is the group that's willing to work, or is the cheapest workforce, because they only cost this much. So for the business, this is the group you want to hire. And the problem is, you've got this many people all the way to QS wanting those jobs. So which ones do you hire? Well, what in fact happened when they raised the minimum wage in Seattle and San Francisco in restaurants? Do you think they kept the waiters with no experience, or they kept their best waiters and waitresses? You're going to pay them all the same. You're going to keep the good ones, or the good ones, or the not so experienced ones? You're going to keep the good ones. So you're probably going to recruit from up here. These people wouldn't even have been in the market. They would have gone on to some other market where their skills were more highly valued. So in fact, what happened was, a lot of restaurant workers in marginal restaurants lost their jobs. And if you're not really experienced, you didn't get a job, because we've got this new high minimum wage. So if in fact you hired these people to satisfy this demand on this side, then you've attracted them from an alternative source, because they would have exited the market. They would not be in the workforce. They would be in a market where they were making more money, because they have the ability to earn more money. The value of their marginal product is higher than it would have earned in this market. So they would have found another job somewhere else. But because there was this new minimum wage, they stayed in that restaurant job. And sure enough, that's what you had. Lower skilled people with less experience, didn't get the restaurant job. It went to the most experienced person, and the marginal restaurants that were barely making it got driven out of business. So what you ended up with was fewer, more expensive restaurants and fewer people employed. And the people that probably most needed the jobs didn't get them. Yes, Megan.
Hi, so sorry. I just had a quick question. Is this?
I cannot hear a word you're saying. Can you turn up your mic?
Can you hear me now?
No. Did you do a mic check?
Yeah, I just was in Zoom. It's saying it's popping up on mine.
Let's exit this and then see if we can hear you. Can you chat?
Yeah. Is this office hours?
I'm going to stop the share, and so we can. No, it's not office hours. It's the lecture.
Okay. I think I went to the wrong.
And we just cannot hear you at all. Are you on mute? Can you turn up your mic?
I'm just going to rejoin. I'll rejoin.
Oh,
Sorry.
it's me. It's me. Now I can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. It was saying that I was seeing it pop in. I'm so sorry. I thought this was chapter 5 health, but this is the actual lecture.
Well, we have the lecture, but it is going to be help. So if you have a question, do ask.
Okay.
I sent a message yesterday that we had to kind of reorganize, but we can't have help until we have the lecture. So this is help in the way that it's the lecture.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt it.
You can interrupt all you want. Do you have a question?
I think I'll come tomorrow because I see that tomorrow at noon you have help with assignments and homework.
Yeah.
So I'll come then. I'm so sorry. I just was finally able to make one of these, so I was like, I need to come. But I'll come to the next one. I'm so sorry.
Well, you could listen to this lecture too if you want.
Yeah, I'll stay on. I have to segue to another meeting at 1, but I'll stay on until then.
Okay, great. It should be over by then.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go back to the screen share.
That sounds great. And
Okay.
I'll come tomorrow.
Okay, so we're going to go back to the screen share. So again, what are we saying? So if you want to hire more labor, how are we going to value that labor? Because that labor is a cost. Remember, when we're doing net benefits, we need the cost of what we sold, the output, minus, or the benefit of what we sold, minus the cost of the labor. So there's two possibilities. The labor would otherwise have been employed at WM. So that would be this group over here. They would be otherwise employed, maybe not these people, but these people up here would be otherwise employed with WM. So you cannot value them the same way as you value these people, because the supply curve tells you that we don't value their labor the same way. So if we're talking about this group up here, we're talking about the group that would have been employed at wage WM. So they would have had a job somewhere else, but because you have this new minimum wage, I'm going to come over here and work. So they would be valued at wage WM. And the labor that would have been otherwise unemployed would have an opportunity cost of WA, which is right here, right? That's how much you really gotta figure their value at, because they are in this section of the supply curve. I know that that may seem offensive to some people to say this person's labor is only valued at this and this person's labor is only valued at that. But I think we all know that as we get more experience, we get raises and we move up because our labor is now worth more because we are experienced and educated. And this is why we move up. So that's what's happening. So in the first case, the net benefit would be the output is the same. It's valued at whatever it's valued at. And then here would be the cost of labor if you were employed doing something else and we attracted you over here with this new wage. And this one would be the case if you didn't have a job. If you didn't have a job or you were on the low end of the supply curve, then that would be that value. So if you're doing a project to employ unemployed people, you're valuing at a WA wage. And when you're doing a project and you just need workers, so let's just get them in here and you import workers, then that's probably a WM valuation. So this is what's going to drive you to distraction, because most everybody that looks at this thinks that minimum wage is a great thing. What I'm suggesting is that you are distorting this market by coming in here and passing a law that's insisting that we have to pay somebody this much but it's not looking at the way the market values their services. You're interfering with them going to the highest and best use. And I'm not saying that I want everybody stuck in a minimum wage job. What I'm saying is that we need to get people to be gearing up to get skills and learn how to get those higher end jobs. That's what I'm suggesting. But somehow we think that if we just dictate a wage, that this is going to solve the problem. And I don't quite think it is. And neither does efficiency, the efficiency and the economic point of view. So that's really what we're looking at. This is exactly what we're talking about. And again, this starts to tell you how you deal. If you're given a subsidy or you're given a tax, how you negotiate that in a problem. I'm trying to remember if you're given one. I think you are on homework 5, where you're saying, okay, so the tax is this, the subsidy is that. How do we fix a market price to account for a tax or a subsidy that does this very thing right here and distorts it? That's what we're talking about. So that's what we're trying to do, and that's the purpose of this table right here. Yeah, we're almost done, actually. So what are these distorting indirect taxes or subsidies? Well, if you're adding a tax or you're adding a subsidy, you've got to figure out exactly how you do this. So this is actually in words what we've just done here. And it will basically tell you in the problem if it's a distorting tax or a distorting subsidy. But in most cases, you could probably figure it out yourself by saying, am I changing the price in a market because there's some cost that wasn't paid? In that case, it's correcting. Some pollution costs that we need to tack on, or some extra benefit we need to tack on so we can get more of it. If you're not doing that, then it's distorting. And we do this a lot. We distort a lot because we have people in these curves, like these people here, think that the price should be lower because they, you know, that's what they think. They're only willing to pay this much, or they won't be in the market. They won't be able to hire anybody. Or these people think that it's not enough because ours is up here and this is below us. So you need to increase the price so we can make the money we want. So it's a constant battle with people wanting what they want. So they're always pushing, thinking that you can mess in markets and change prices because that's what you want to do. The people that want import restrictions. Why, even immigration. If you want farm workers and you can't find anybody to do the farm work, they can't harvest because they don't have workers, because they cannot pay people enough to get them to work in the fields, but you're not letting me import them. But still we have immigration controls on that. So these are some of the problems that we see because people have other issues that they're concerned about. And so they want to mess with markets to ensure their concerns are addressed, but it doesn't really work, basically. And it messes us up when we do projects because it gives us inaccurate pricing signals. So again, a corrective tax or subsidy is intending to discourage or encourage an activity that's too high or too low. Let's just look at an example. Tax on tobacco. Why do we tax tobacco? Why do we tax tobacco? We tax tobacco because we think it has some negative pollution effects. It kills me, it kills everybody around me. So we tax it, and we think it's probably corrective because we want to discourage consumption, right? So if it's corrective, then we need to value it at net of the tax, right? You need to subtract the tax out, and that's really the value of tobacco products because we want to discourage consumption. But if it's distortionary, then you would include the tax in the price.
Professor Cox, would this include corrective taxes for land use and just like the negative side effects of like fertilizer and non-point source pollution?
Yes, it would include that. So for example, if you have a pollution that you're causing, you would want to charge people, like say if there's a certain insecticide that's really bad, you might want to put a tax on it to discourage people from using it. That's a corrective tax.
So are just like thinking in terms of like the current political climate, who would be taxing and enforcing those taxes within our country?
It would have to be the government, but here's the problem. Here's the killer. Because I, of course, am the only person around that thinks we should pay more for gas and tax the heck out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Why? The more we charge for it, the less we would use.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't cause so much pollution. Right? Why do we want to make it so free? Look at what they did in Europe. In 1950s in Europe, they said, we don't have we don't have gas. We don't want a bunch of cars because we don't have the roads for it. We have these tiny little roads in our cities. We have these old cities. We don't want gas goo all over everything, right? So what did they do? They have historically charged a very large gas tax. What did it do? Prevent people from buying cars. But what is the reason that it worked? Because they realized, oh, well, we need to worry about poor people. So what did they do? They used all those tax dollars and made these fantastic public transportation systems and subsidized the poor, which is a corrective subsidy, on top of a corrective tax to discourage people from buying gas and to support public transportation for everybody so that no one is put at a disadvantage. So there's an example where we had a correcting tax and a correcting subsidy that Europe has done, and whoever thought over that in Europe deserves an award because they have very good transportation systems. But what did we do in America? We built the interstate highway system, thank you Dwight Eisenhower, and we got totally into cars, gas guzzling huge cars, driving all over. Now we cannot afford to build the new roads, but we didn't support public transportation and we didn't want to raise the gas tax. So we have no correcting tax on fuel, which causes all sorts of pollution problems. We have no money to pay for new highways, because where were we going to get the revenues? And lastly, our public transportation system got driven out because in the 50s and 60s, we had a lot of gas, a lot of cheap gas. So everybody in America loves cars. SUVs, isn't it the biggest seller? And you don't see that so much in Europe, right? Because they discourage it by charging so much for gas.
So I guess like the question remains is like if we were to aim towards like segueing over to that kind of system, like right, we have like 330 million people in our country, like, and our country is just so divided right now to begin with. Could it be something that instead of on the federal level, we could do something on the state level? Like, for example, like Hawaii like charges like 5 cents per plastic bottle that you buy from the store, like that deposit tax, and you get that, or 6 cents, I think even, and you get 5 cents of it back as long as you recycle. And like other states don't do that. But I found that like because of that, I don't really buy, like I drink out of a reusable bottle because I'm like, I don't want to keep buying bottles and getting charged by it. And plus it's terrible for the environment, right?
Yeah.
So I guess like, could this be something that could be implemented on a state or regional level?
It could be, but let me just point out one little thing that's the problem. Who really likes to pay more taxes?
Nobody.
This is politically very painful. No one likes this. They like to pass rules. Oh, don't do that. And I'm like, no, the kiss of death for any project is to start telling everybody what to do. Because when you tell people what to do, what do? The opposite of what you're telling them, right? This is a human thing, human condition problem, and nobody likes to pay taxes. And the problem is you also need to think about the people that are really gonna suffer, like the poor people. In Hawaii, like on Oahu, they have a pretty good bus system. So taxing fuel for them may not be so bad, but if you were on one of the other islands with no bus system and you tried to get around without a car, and it's already a hugely expensive operation in Hawaii with these things, it's going to be rough, particularly with the economic crisis of the pandemic. So this is one of the problems we have. It sounds great for me to say it, but people get upset. It's very controversial. But Europe did it in the 50s and they got used to it. And then they quickly started building these great public transportation. So it was less painful.
I actually have been, I'm just looking at it. It's called Emerald Cities. I don't know if you've read that book. I honestly haven't had much time because it's been a little crazy. But the author went to a town in Germany and he noticed that like there's like bike garages over there. And I know my friend has lived in the Netherlands and there's like, just like, it's so much like biker friendly. And I think about like on island when I see like these poor bikers that are hugging like the breakdown lane or whatnot, and they're just trying to bike from like one end to the other. And I'm like, these poor bikers, like they risk getting hit by cars, even though like they're doing like a great mode of transportation. And it just the way that our infrastructure is set up, it's just not set up for that alternative.
Right. But the problem is all this is very expensive and it takes a long time to get change in these communities. And Europe has been working on this since 1950. You go to China, they used to ride bikes. They don't do that anymore. They're like, they love cars now. So a lot of it is, it's very difficult to do all this. It's expensive to change the infrastructure to solve the problem for the people who can't afford the high gas price or whatever it is. And even on the plastic bottles, we can't even do recycling anymore because China has stopped. So we have all this recycling sitting in warehouses in LA, not knowing what to do with it. So it's a very complex moving parts. But again, when we're doing this, we're just trying to account for these sorts of problems rather than, and it's going to get worse with the minimum wage because you're seeing the Black Lives Matter groups. We deserve higher wages. The problem is if you're going to pay them more, then you have to earn the profits to make that payment or someone's going to go out of business.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Someone's calling me. I'll just put on mute. So sorry.
No problem. We're almost done. I know we're getting sick of talking about me preaching for more taxes, but here we go. So if you have a corrective tax, like for example, tax on diesel is set to the level of the marginal cost of air pollution. So this is kind of what we want because we can then get the money to try and clean up the pollution or at least do something to solve the problem. And if it's corrective, then we use the gross of tax to measure the opportunity cost. The net price of the cost of the resources measures the marginal production cost, and the tax measures the marginal external cost. So we're actually able to account for this. Okay, so I think we're about done. And then tomorrow I'm gonna go through some help on this thing because we're kind of narrowing in on our last of our thing and not very many people are here, but I wanna get through this lecture. So let me go back to, no, I wanna go back to, come on. Okay, so this is our last slide. So again, if you're doing a corrective tax, then you just kind of can take these slides and read through them because when you do a homework problem, it will tell you whether it's corrective or not. And if it's corrective, then you can just follow these decision rules. If it's something that's distorting, then you can follow the alternative decision rules. You have any more questions, Megan? Oh, she's on mute. Okay. So that's all I have. So I'm going to stop recording. And we're going to hit this again tomorrow for everyone who views this. And we're going to get more down on examples and homework help. And also read the FAQs. So we're going to stop.